mail-order bride was sent back for being black. But the cowboy who saw her stumble from the dusty train platform couldn't shake what he witnessed in her steady gaze. The crowd gathered with cruel whispers as the educated woman faced public rejection, their sneers cutting deeper than the desert wind. She clutched a worn satchel, dignity intact despite the merchant's loud demands for her immediate return east. Her fate seemed sealed, another dream crushed under the weight of prejudice. But the silent cowboy watching from the livery stable noticed something others missed: the way she studied the town's crumbling buildings with calculating eyes. He carried his own secrets, his own reasons for recognizing strength disguised as vulnerability. Neither knew that her hidden expertise held the key to saving a community teetering on the edge of disaster, while his choice to act could reshape both their destinies. Would conscience triumph over conformity when both their futures hung in the balance? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The train's wheels screeched against iron rails as it pulled into Broad Gulch Station. Steam hissed from the engine like a dying breath. Vivian Hartley stepped onto the wooden platform, her leather satchel clutched tight against her chest. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on her dark skin. She had spent her last dollar on this journey west. The teaching position in Philadelphia had vanished when the school board decided they needed someone more suitable. Her family had turned their backs when she announced her plans to answer a mail-order bride advertisement. Now she stood alone in a town that looked nothing like the letters had promised. Dust swirled around her worn boots as she searched the small crowd for Silas Brennan. The correspondence had been brief but hopeful. He needed a wife. She needed a new beginning. Neither had mentioned color in their letters. Silas emerged from behind a weathered post. His face went from expectation to shock to disgust in 3 quick beats. The silence stretched between them like a canyon. He cleared his throat loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. His voice carried across the platform with deliberate cruelty. The townspeople pressed closer, drawn by the promise of drama. Vivian felt their stares like physical blows. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men shook their heads with knowing looks. Children pointed until their mothers pulled them away. But something else caught her attention. The buildings around the station leaned at dangerous angles. Water damage stained the schoolhouse walls. Most concerning of all, she could see stress fractures in the stone foundation of what appeared to be a dam in the distance. Her architectural training kicked in automatically. She pulled a small journal from her satchel and made quick sketches. The measurements were all wrong. The drainage was inadequate. This town was a disaster waiting to happen. Lucas Callahan watched the scene unfold from the shadows of the livery stable. He had seen enough cruelty in his 30 years to recognize it instantly. But something about the woman's composure struck him differently. She did not beg or cry. Instead, she studied their town with the focused attention of someone who understood structures. Her pencil moved across paper with confident strokes. Lucas knew about hiding in plain sight. His Mexican heritage showed in his dark eyes and olive skin, but his English was perfect, and his manner quiet enough that most folks forgot to ask questions. He had learned long ago that survival meant keeping his head down. Martha Dunn pushed through the crowd from her inn across the street. Her gray hair was pinned back severely, but her eyes held kindness that the years had not erased. She had built her business by reading people quickly and accurately. She studied Vivienne for a long moment. Then she stepped forward. Martha offered her inn as temporary shelter. The crowd murmured disapproval. Silas demanded the woman leave on the next eastbound train, but Martha had made her decision. Mayor Jeremiah Hawk arrived with the authority his position demanded. His suit was too fine for the dusty street, his manner too polished for genuine frontier leadership. He had built his career on telling people what they wanted to hear. He approached Martha with practiced diplomacy. The town had standards to maintain. Visitors needed to understand their place. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if certain situations resolved themselves quickly. Martha listened politely. Then she took Vivian's arm and walked toward the inn. A stranger stepped off the same train that had brought Vivian. Eli Jackson carried a leather portfolio and wore the clothes of an educated Easterner. He introduced himself as a journalist documenting frontier life for newspapers back in civilization. He began asking questions immediately. How did the town handle newcomers? What were the local customs regarding settlement? His pencil moved as quickly as Vivian's had, but his focus was entirely on the people rather than the buildings. Evening shadows lengthened as the crowd finally dispersed. Lucas remained at his post, watching the inn where light flickered in an upstairs window. He could not shake the memory of how the woman had looked at their town, not with the eyes of someone seeking charity, but with the gaze of someone who saw solutions. Vivienne sat in her small room, spreading her sketches across the narrow bed. The structural problems were worse than she had initially thought. The dam showed clear signs of stress that could lead to catastrophic failure. The school's foundation was sinking on one side. Even Martha's inn had support beam issues that would worsen with time. She had spent 4 years studying at one of the few colleges that accepted women in their engineering program. She had graduated at the top of her class. She understood load distribution, water management, and structural integrity better than most men twice her age. But none of that mattered if she was on tomorrow's train back to nowhere. Lucas made his decision as the church bell chimed 9 o'clock. He crossed the street and knocked on Martha's door. Some things were more important than staying invisible. The next morning would bring consequences none of them could foresee. The spring rains were coming early, and the dam was not ready. Lucas found Vivian in Martha's kitchen before dawn. She sat hunched over her sketches, calculating measurements by lamplight. Empty coffee cups surrounded her like sentries. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. He had spent the night wrestling with his conscience. Staying silent had kept him safe for years, but safety felt like cowardice when measured against what he had witnessed yesterday. Martha bustled in with fresh biscuits and hot coffee. She set plates down without ceremony. Her movements spoke louder than words. This woman would not be turned away while Martha Dunn had breath in her body. Vivian looked up from her papers. Her eyes met Lucas's with surprising directness. Most people in Broad Gulch avoided looking at him too closely. They preferred their assumptions to uncomfortable truths. He asked what she was drawing. The question came out rougher than intended. Years of staying quiet had made conversation feel foreign. She spread the sketches across the scarred wooden table. Her pencil work was precise, professional. These were not the idle doodles of someone passing time. These were the technical drawings of someone who understood engineering. The dam dominated her largest sketch. She had calculated water pressure, seasonal flow rates, and structural load capacity. Her numbers painted a terrifying picture. The stonework was failing. The spillway was inadequate. The entire structure could collapse with the next heavy rain. Lucas studied her work with growing amazement. He had learned construction from his grandfather, a master mason who had built churches across Mexico. He recognized expertise when he saw it. Vivian revealed her education with quiet pride. 4 years at a progressive college in Massachusetts, one of only 3 women in the engineering program, top marks in structural design and water management. She had graduated with honors while her male classmates struggled with basic concepts. The revelation hit Lucas like a physical blow. This woman was not seeking charity or acceptance. She was the answer to problems that kept Mayor Hawk awake at night. The town had been praying for solutions while preparing to send away their salvation. Martha listened from the doorway. Her weathered face showed no surprise. She had suspected something from the moment she saw Vivian examining the buildings. Desperation did not move with such confident precision. Outside, the town was waking up. Shopkeepers swept their porches. Children ran toward the struggling schoolhouse. Life continued its rhythm while disaster lurked beneath the surface. Mayor Hawk arrived at the inn with 2 other men. His smile was politician smooth and twice as false. He had come to escort their visitor to the morning train. The conversation would be brief and final. Martha blocked the doorway with her substantial frame. Her inn operated under territorial law. Guests paid their bills and followed house rules. Everything else was none of the mayor's business. Hawk's smile tightened. He spoke about community standards and proper procedures. His words carried implied threats wrapped in legal language. Martha had operated her business too long to be intimidated by posturing. Vivian emerged from the kitchen with her sketches. She looked directly at Mayor Hawk and made him an offer. She would provide structural analysis of the town's critical buildings. No charge. Professional consultation from someone with actual training. Hawk dismissed her credentials without examination. Book learning meant nothing on the frontier. They needed practical solutions from people who understood local conditions. Lucas stepped forward. His voice was steady despite the risk. He vouched for her expertise. Her calculations were sound. Her observations were accurate. The town would be foolish to ignore professional advice. The mayor's eyes narrowed. Lucas had overstepped his carefully maintained position. Consequences would follow this moment of conscience. Eli Jackson appeared with his notebook already open. He asked pointed questions about territorial policies regarding professional licensing. Were there specific laws preventing qualified individuals from offering services? His pen captured every word with journalistic precision. The confrontation dissolved into uncomfortable silence. Hawk retreated with promises of further discussion. His departure felt more like strategic withdrawal than victory. Lucas helped Vivian organize her papers. Her hands shook slightly as she rolled the sketches. The morning had cost them both something they could not easily replace. She thanked him with simple words that carried deep meaning. He had chosen to stand when standing was dangerous. She would not forget his courage. Martha served lunch to a half-empty dining room. Word had spread about her guest and her inn's defender. Some customers stayed away in disapproval. Others came specifically to show support. The town was choosing sides. That afternoon brought the first spring clouds. They gathered over the mountains like dark promises. The seasonal rains were arriving early. The dam would face its greatest test within days. Vivian spent the daylight hours making discreet repairs to Martha's inn. Loose foundation stones were reset. Sagging beams were properly braced. Water damage was sealed against future storms. Her work was professional and thorough. Each improvement demonstrated skills that could benefit the entire community. Martha watched with growing satisfaction. Her instincts had been correct. Lucas returned that evening with materials and tools. He had made his choice completely. His reputation was already compromised. He might as well make the sacrifice worthwhile. Together they worked by lantern light, reinforcing critical support structures. Vivian directed while Lucas provided muscle and local knowledge. Their partnership felt natural despite its newness. The clouds thickened overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The rains were coming whether Broad Gulch was ready or not. The storm clouds gathered like an army preparing for battle. Thunder rolled across the desert with increasing frequency. The spring rains had arrived 3 weeks early, and Broad Gulch was not prepared. Mayor Hawk called an emergency town meeting at the schoolhouse. The agenda was simple. Vote to remove Vivian Hartley before her presence caused more disruption. The storm provided perfect timing for decisive action. Families crowded into the cramped building despite the evening rain beginning to fall. Water already seeped through the poorly sealed windows. The foundation creaked ominously under the gathered weight. Hawk stood at the front with practiced authority. He spoke of community values and frontier traditions. Outsiders who did not understand their ways could only bring trouble. The vote was a formality to restore proper order. Silas Brennan stood to support the mayor. His embarrassment had festered into anger over the past days. He demanded compensation for his wasted time and damaged reputation. The woman had deceived him with false expectations. Martha rose from her seat in the back. Her voice carried clearly through the cramped space. She had operated her business for 20 years without asking the mayor's permission about guests. She would not start now. Several other business owners shifted uncomfortably. Martha's Inn was the town's primary source of income from travelers. Her support carried economic weight that politics could not easily dismiss. Lucas felt every eye in the room turn toward him. His moment of choice had arrived with the inevitability of the storm outside. He could retreat into silence or stand with consequences he could not control. He stood slowly. His voice was quiet, but clear. Vivian Hartley was the most qualified engineer any of them would ever meet. Rejecting her expertise was like refusing water in the desert. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Lucas had violated unspoken rules that kept their community stable. His mixed heritage was whispered about in corners. His defense of the woman confirmed suspicions. Eli Jackson raised his hand for recognition. As a visiting journalist, he requested permission to ask questions about territorial law. Were there specific statutes governing professional qualifications for engineers? Hawk deflected the inquiry with practiced skill. Local communities maintained authority over their own affairs. Outside regulations did not supersede community standards. The rain intensified against the schoolhouse roof. Water began dripping through loose shingles onto the crowd below. People moved restlessly as puddles formed on the floor. A sharp crack echoed through the building. Everyone froze. The sound came from beneath their feet. The foundation was shifting under the combined stress of the storm and overcrowding. Vivian stood from her place near the door. She had remained silent during the arguments about her fate. Now she spoke with the calm authority of professional expertise. The building was structurally unsound. The foundation was sinking on the north side. The roof could not handle heavy water accumulation. Everyone needed to evacuate immediately. Hawk ordered her to remain silent. She had no authority to make such demands. The schoolhouse had served the community for 15 years without problems. Another crack split the air. This time everyone heard it clearly. A section of floor sagged visibly. Children began crying as their parents reached for them. Vivian took charge with emergency training that overrode social conventions. She directed the evacuation with precise instructions. Families filed out in organized groups while she monitored the building's increasing instability. The crowd gathered outside in the driving rain. The schoolhouse groaned and settled as water undermined its failing foundation. Without Vivian's warning, people would have been trapped inside. But the immediate crisis revealed a larger disaster approaching. The dam upstream was under tremendous pressure from the unexpected storm. Water poured over the spillway in volumes it was never designed to handle. Lucas grabbed a lantern and ran toward the dam with Vivian close behind. Other townspeople followed despite the dangerous conditions. They reached the structure as it began showing signs of catastrophic failure. Massive stones were shifting in the dam face. Mortar crumbled under pressure it could not withstand. The reservoir behind the structure contained enough water to destroy half the town. Hawk arrived with several other men. He stared at the crisis with the helpless expression of someone whose authority meant nothing against natural forces. His political solutions could not hold back floodwaters. Vivian pulled out her sketches despite the rain soaking the paper. Her emergency repair plans had been prepared for exactly this situation. She shouted instructions over the storm noise. They needed sandbags to redirect water flow, heavy stones to reinforce the weakest sections, wooden braces to distribute the load more evenly. The work would be dangerous but possible if they acted immediately. Lucas stepped forward without hesitation. He had construction experience and tools. More importantly, he trusted Vivian's expertise completely. His support would encourage others to follow her guidance. Martha organized the women to gather materials. Eli documented the crisis while helping where he could. Even some of Hawk's supporters began following Vivian's directions as panic overcame prejudice. They worked through the night in driving rain. Vivian directed emergency repairs with professional precision. Her college training had included crisis management and structural triage. Theory became life-saving practice. Lucas coordinated the heavy construction work. His grandfather's lessons in masonry proved invaluable. Together, he and Vivian made split-second decisions that would determine the town's survival. Dawn broke over a community transformed by shared crisis. The dam held against the storm through their combined efforts. Broad Gulch had been saved by the woman they had planned to exile. The morning sun revealed a town that had narrowly escaped disaster. Watermarks on buildings showed how close the flood had come to destroying everything. Families gathered in the muddy streets, grateful to see their homes still standing. Eli Jackson stood before the crowd with his notebook closed for once. His usual journalist's demeanor had shifted into something more official. He requested everyone's attention for an important announcement. His voice carried across the square with surprising authority. He was not simply a traveling writer documenting frontier life. His true assignment came from the territorial government in Phoenix. The revelation struck like lightning on clear sky. Eli was an official investigator sent to examine reports of administrative corruption and discriminatory practices in Broad Gulch. His documentation would determine whether federal intervention was necessary. Mayor Hawk's face went pale beneath his carefully maintained composure. Federal oversight meant the end of his political career and possible criminal charges. Everything he had built through years of careful maneuvering was crumbling. Eli continued his explanation with methodical precision. His investigation had revealed serious problems with town management. Infrastructure had been neglected while funds disappeared into private accounts. Public safety had been compromised by incompetent leadership. The dam crisis had provided perfect evidence of systemic failure. A qualified engineer had been rejected based on prejudice while critical repairs were ignored. The town had nearly been destroyed by the very attitudes his investigation was meant to address. But something unexpected had occurred during the emergency. The community had united behind competent leadership regardless of its source. Vivienne's expertise had saved lives and property when official authority had proven useless. This transformation could influence his final report significantly. Communities that demonstrated genuine progress toward equality and professional competence could avoid federal intervention. Those that remained committed to discrimination would face direct territorial oversight. The crowd absorbed this information with varying degrees of shock and calculation. Some were outraged by the deception. Others were relieved that their cooperation during the crisis might protect their autonomy. Vivienne stood quietly beside Lucas as the implications became clear. Her fate was no longer in the hands of local prejudice. Federal law superseded community standards when it came to professional qualifications and civil rights. Martha stepped forward with characteristic directness. She formally requested that the town hire Vivienne as their official engineer and architect. Her qualifications were beyond question. Her performance during the emergency had proven her competence completely. Several business owners voiced immediate support. The general store owner had lost merchandise to flooding before. The church elder worried about the steeple's stability. The school board needed someone who could design a safe building for their children. Hawk tried to regain control of the situation with desperate political maneuvering. He questioned the investigators' authority and demanded to see official credentials. His challenges sounded hollow after his helplessness during the actual crisis. Eli produced documentation that ended all debate about his legitimacy. His authority came directly from the territorial governor. His recommendations would carry the force of federal law. The transformation in community dynamics was immediate and visible. People who had whispered cruel comments 3 days earlier now approached Vivienne with respectful questions about their properties. She responded to each inquiry with professional courtesy, despite their previous treatment. Her architectural training had taught her to separate personal feelings from technical responsibilities. The buildings needed help regardless of their owners' attitudes. Lucas found himself in an equally strange position. His public support of Vivienne had elevated his status rather than destroying it. People sought his opinion as someone who had recognized her value before the crisis forced their acceptance. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent years hiding his heritage to maintain acceptance. Now his willingness to stand for justice had earned him genuine respect. Martha organized a town planning meeting for the following week. Vivienne would present comprehensive infrastructure improvements needed to prevent future disasters. The community would vote on funding mechanisms and implementation schedules. The shift from rejection to eager consultation happened with startling speed. Fear of federal intervention motivated rapid attitude adjustments. Economic self-interest aligned with moral necessity. Vivienne spent the afternoon conducting detailed structural assessments of critical buildings. The schoolhouse needed complete reconstruction. The church required foundation work. The main commercial buildings needed reinforcement against flood damage. Each project would take months to complete properly. She would need to establish a permanent practice in Broad Gulch. The woman they had tried to exile 3 days earlier was now essential to their future survival. Lucas helped with measurements and materials assessment. Their working partnership had evolved into something deeper during the crisis. Mutual respect had grown into genuine affection, built on shared values and common purpose. Eli documented the community's transformation with journalistic thoroughness. His final report would describe how external pressure had catalyzed positive change. Federal intervention would not be necessary if current progress continued. Mayor Hawke's support base evaporated as people distanced themselves from his failed leadership. The crisis had exposed his fundamental inadequacy when real challenges arose. His political career was effectively over. That evening, Vivienne sat in Martha's dining room reviewing contracts for her new position. The legal documents made her status official and permanent. She would be the first licensed female engineer in Arizona territory. The journey from unwanted mail-order bride to respected professional had taken exactly 1 week. The transformation seemed impossible, but the evidence surrounded her in the form of grateful community members seeking her expertise. Lucas joined her with coffee and quiet satisfaction. They had both revealed their true selves during the crisis. The pretense and hiding were finally over. Outside, construction crews worked by lamplight repairing flood damage under Vivienne's supervision. The town was literally rebuilding itself according to her vision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities they would face together. 3 months later, Broad Gulch hummed with the sounds of construction and progress. Hammers rang against nails as workers rebuilt the schoolhouse according to Vivienne's designs. The new foundation sat on solid bedrock, engineered to withstand both floods and earthquakes. Vivienne walked through the construction site with her leather portfolio, checking measurements against her blueprints. Every angle had been calculated for maximum safety and efficiency. The building would serve children for generations without the structural failures that had plagued the old schoolhouse. Lucas worked alongside the construction crew, his grandfather's masonry skills proving invaluable in executing Vivienne's vision. He had become her unofficial partner in all projects, bridging the gap between technical expertise and local knowledge. Their professional relationship had deepened into something neither had expected to find in the Arizona desert. Respect had grown into affection, then into love built on shared purpose and mutual admiration. The new dam reinforcements held strong against seasonal water flow. Vivienne's emergency repairs had been expanded into permanent improvements that would protect the town for decades. The reservoir levels remained stable even during heavy mountain runoff. Martha's Inn had become the unofficial headquarters for town planning meetings. Her dining room hosted evening discussions about future projects and community development. The woman who had offered shelter to a rejected stranger now presided over the town's renaissance. Mayor Hawke's replacement was a progressive merchant named Samuel Torres, whose family had arrived from Mexico 2 decades earlier. His election demonstrated how dramatically community attitudes had shifted in just a few months. Torres actively solicited Vivienne's input on all municipal decisions involving construction and infrastructure. Her engineering expertise had become the foundation of responsible governance. The town council meetings now featured technical discussions rather than political posturing. Eli Jackson had filed his final report with the territorial government, documenting Broad Gulch as a model community for progressive frontier development. Federal intervention was no longer necessary. The town had transformed itself through crisis and conscious choice. His newspaper articles about the transformation had attracted attention throughout the territory. Other communities facing similar infrastructure challenges began requesting consultations from Vivienne's growing engineering practice. The economic benefits of competent planning became evident as businesses flourished in the safer, more reliable environment. New merchants arrived, confident that their investments would be protected by proper construction and flood management. Vivienne's practice expanded to include projects in neighboring towns. Her reputation spread through professional networks in Phoenix and beyond. She was becoming known as the engineer who could solve problems others found impossible. Lucas learned construction techniques and project management skills through hands-on experience with increasingly complex builds. His natural abilities combined with Vivienne's technical training created a formidable partnership. Their engagement was announced at the church's dedication ceremony. The building's new steeple, reinforced according to Vivienne's calculations, stood as a symbol of their shared commitment to the community's future. The wedding planning became a town-wide celebration of transformation. The couple represented everything Broad Gulch had become: inclusive, progressive, and built on merit rather than prejudice. Silas Brennan had left town quietly after the crisis, his humiliation complete. His mail-order bride scheme had backfired spectacularly, delivering exactly what the community needed, despite his selfish intentions. Martha served as wedding coordinator with characteristic efficiency. Her inn would host the reception. The new schoolhouse would provide space for the ceremony. The entire town was invited to celebrate the union that had saved them all. Vivian designed their future home according to the latest architectural principles she had studied back east. The house would demonstrate advanced techniques for desert construction, serving as both residence and showcase for her professional capabilities. Lucas contributed local knowledge about materials and weather patterns that enhanced Vivian's technical designs. Their collaboration produced buildings that were both scientifically sound and perfectly adapted to frontier conditions. The territorial governor visited Broad Gulch to observe their remarkable transformation firsthand. He met with Vivian to discuss establishing an engineering college that would serve the entire Southwest region. Her success had proven that qualified professionals could thrive on the frontier when communities embraced merit over prejudice. The college would formalize training that had previously required expensive travel to Eastern institutions. Young women from across the territory began writing to Vivian for advice about pursuing technical careers. She responded to each letter personally, encouraging the next generation to follow their abilities rather than social expectations. The old divisions and hostilities had not vanished completely, but they no longer controlled community decisions. Progress required constant attention, but the foundation for lasting change had been established. Evening found Vivian and Lucas reviewing plans for their largest project yet, a comprehensive water management system that would serve 3 counties. The territorial government had awarded them the contract based on their proven expertise. Their success story was being repeated in other communities where competent leadership replaced prejudice-based decision-making. Change was spreading throughout the territory like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Martha closed her inn's kitchen and joined them for coffee and planning discussions. She had become their unofficial advisor, her practical wisdom balancing their technical expertise. The transformation was complete, but ongoing. Broad Gulch had evolved from a failing frontier town into a thriving example of what communities could accomplish when they valued competence over conformity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Tonight, they celebrated how far they had traveled from that desperate morning when a rejected mail-order bride had stepped off the train into an uncertain future that had become their shared destiny. 6 months after the crisis that had changed everything, the train pulled into Broad Gulch Station with its familiar screech of brakes and hiss of steam. But the platform that greeted arriving passengers bore little resemblance to the dusty, crumbling structure where Vivian had faced rejection. New stone foundations supported a rebuilt station house designed to withstand both floods and earthquakes. Clean windows reflected the morning sun. Fresh paint gleamed on properly sealed walls. Everything spoke of competent engineering and community pride. Vivian Callahan stood on that same platform, now wearing a simple gold wedding band and carrying architectural plans for the territorial college that would bear her name. The woman who had arrived as an unwanted mail-order bride was now Arizona Territory's first licensed female engineer. Her practice had grown beyond anything she had imagined during those desperate early days. Projects stretched from Phoenix to Santa Fe. Young women traveled hundreds of miles to apprentice under her guidance. Her success had opened doors for others who shared her determination. Lucas worked beside her as both husband and business partner, his natural construction skills refined through years of implementing her designs. Their collaboration had produced buildings that combined Eastern engineering principles with practical frontier knowledge. The train released its latest group of passengers onto the platform. Among them stood a young woman clutching a worn satchel, her eyes bright with hope and uncertainty. She had come to answer a mail-order bride advertisement from a rancher named Thomas Fletcher. The woman's skin was darker than Vivian's, her heritage clearly mixed African and Cherokee. 6 months earlier, her arrival would have caused the same cruel whispers and harsh rejections that had greeted Vivian. Instead, Martha Dunn approached with welcoming efficiency. Her inn had become the territory's model for hospitality. She offered assistance with luggage and directions to wherever the young woman needed to go. Thomas Fletcher emerged from the small crowd, his face showing none of the shock and disgust that had marked Silas Brennan's reaction. The correspondents had been honest about appearance and background. His interest was in finding a partner who shared his values and work ethic. The couple's greeting was polite and respectful. They walked together toward his waiting wagon, discussing the ranch and her journey with the careful courtesy of people getting to know each other properly. Vivian watched the scene with deep satisfaction. The transformation was complete when it became ordinary rather than remarkable. Progress was measured not by dramatic gestures, but by quiet acceptance of what should always have been normal. Eli Jackson had returned to document the community's long-term development for a book about frontier social change. His articles about Broad Gulch had influenced territorial policy throughout the Southwest. Other towns were adopting similar approaches to inclusive development. The territorial governor had appointed Vivian to the commission planning Arizona's eventual statehood. Her expertise in infrastructure development was considered essential for creating sustainable communities across the vast region. The college construction had begun on land donated by grateful townspeople. The engineering school would train the next generation of professionals who would build the modern Southwest. Vivian would serve as the founding dean while maintaining her private practice. Lucas had been elected to the town council on a platform of continued progressive development. His mixed heritage, once hidden in shame, had become an asset in a community that valued diverse perspectives and inclusive leadership. Mayor Torres had established sister city relationships with communities throughout Mexico and the eastern United States. Broad Gulch was becoming a hub for trade and cultural exchange rather than an isolated frontier outpost. Martha's Inn hosted regular conferences where engineers, architects, and town planners shared innovations and solutions. Her dining room conversations had evolved from local gossip to discussions that influenced territorial development policy. The new schoolhouse bustled with children from families that had moved to Broad Gulch, specifically for the quality education and safe environment. The building itself served as a teaching tool, demonstrating proper construction techniques to students who would carry that knowledge throughout their lives. Young women arrived regularly seeking opportunities in engineering, architecture, and other technical fields previously closed to them. Vivian's success had created a network of professional women throughout the territory. The dam and water management systems had prevented flooding in 3 consecutive years of heavy rains. Other communities contracted for similar projects based on Broad Gulch's proven results. Competent engineering was replacing trial and error as the standard approach. Economic prosperity had followed infrastructure improvements with predictable reliability. Businesses flourished when protected from natural disasters. Families invested in permanent structures when they trusted the construction quality. That evening, Vivian and Lucas sat on their porch reviewing plans for expanding the college campus. Their home overlooked the thriving community that had grown from shared crisis into sustained cooperation. The distance traveled seemed impossible when measured against that desperate morning of rejection and humiliation. Yet every step had followed logically from the moment Martha Dunn had offered shelter to a stranger in need. Children played in streets that no longer flooded. Families gathered in buildings that would stand for generations. Young people planned futures that included opportunities their parents never could have imagined. The mail-order bride who had been sent back for being black had become the architect of transformation that reached far beyond one small frontier town. Her story was being repeated throughout the territory as communities learned that competence and character mattered more than appearance or background. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities for continued growth. Tonight, under stars that shone over a landscape shaped by vision rather than prejudice, the future looked as solid as the foundations they had built together.